Welcome, everybody. It is the Thursday edition of Talkback, brought to you by the Mustard Seed Asian Cafe at Southgate Mall, Kootenai Creek Village, the maintenance-free active adult community in Stevensville with the best of Western Montana living. Give them a call at 777-5387. Dig It Excavating, bringing 30 years of excellence to your job. For all your excavation needs, call Glenn at 214-4292. Also brought to you by Transport Equipment, your headquarters for RV service maintenance and repair and service vehicle repair as well. Call 541-9097. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining us in the studio, the fabulous John King. Oh, you weren't expecting me, were you? It helps if your mic.
For me, and I was putting up the Facebook post.
All right, I got to push all these buttons here. Okay. Also joining us in studio, the equally fabulous and taller Bob Seidenschwartz. Hi, Bob.
Guten Morgen.
All right. Wow. And Professor Mehrdad Kia at the University of Montana History Department. Welcome, sir.
Good morning.
It's always a pleasure to see you.
The pleasure is all mine.
All right, so here we are. And so, gentlemen, I'm going to step out, and the floor is yours.
Well, John, I think this show, you had asked Mehrdad and myself to really kind of look at the different candidates and what their foreign policy may look like if they become president. And since we haven't really heard anything but a lot of yelling and accusations, we don't know that. So we're going to do our best. So
if you'll strap on your headphones, we do have one little piece of foreign policy that you might want to, or you want to save that, John?
Oh, I have statements from, so far I've been able to harvest Rubio's, Hillary's, both of their Council on Foreign Relations speeches. Of course, I'm not using the whole 60 minutes. I've got like a couple minutes to kind of tops of the trees. And then I have the most well-known Donald Trump foreign policy statement.
Yes.
Which had to be edited. But, yeah.
Now, would you like to hear one of those first, or do you want to just begin to launch off?
No, I very much would like to hear that. I just want to state that this group here is very representative of what's going on. We got the young millennial who, heavily burdened by debt, has actually had to put his kids out there to go to work. We've got the angry middle-aged white guy who's always angry, doesn't know why, but he's angry with Peter. And we've got the vanguard, the Iranian invasion here with Mehrdad and me, the Zionist puppet master.
Wow.
Behind the scenes. So I think we reflect America very well here today, folks.
Okay, well, thank you so much for bringing the show to a successful conclusion. Okay, no, let's hear a little high fiving going on there. Let's hear from Donald Trump in his own gentle way. Describing his foreign policy.
Now you're talking about sneaky, dirty, underhanded people that want to kill our civilians. They want to go after our civilians. They want to kill not only our civilians, all over the world. And it's going to be stopped. It's going to be stopped. Somebody criticized me the other day because they asked me what I do, and I said, I'm going to bomb the shit out of them. It's true. I don't care. I don't care. They've got to be stopped.
Artfully edited there, right?
They've got to be stopped. And they should have been stopped a long time ago. Look, so in Paris the other night, a horrible thing. And then all of a sudden we attack, and France attacks, all these different sites that they have, right? Why didn't they do this a year ago, 2 years ago? Why didn't they do it? Why do they wait? They always wait for a tragedy to happen. They're never forward. They're always waiting for. So you say, oh, wow, these were training centers, camps. By the way, what did they attack? They attacked the oil. Remember, I've been saying for 2 years, attack the oil. Everybody said, oh, Trump with the oil, Trump. But I said more than attack it. I said attack it, take it, and keep it. That's what I said. So now they're attacking the oil, and a couple of the people said, you know, that was really Trump's idea. I've been saying this for 2 years because a big source of their wealth is the oil. They're making $1 million a day. A lot of money. Making $1 million a day. And I kept saying, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? They're better at the internet than we are. And they're training people to be terrorists and killers on the internet. And they're taking them. And then they'll go away, which is fine. They'll go away. But then we let them come back into the country. Because nobody wants to take away their rights. Do you believe this? It's so unbelievable. So they go and they fight for ISIS. They come back into our country, and we accept them back. And at some point, they won't be going away. They'll be shooting us here, all right? They're not going to be going over to Syria. They're not going to be going over to these other places. They'll stay right here. So I used to be a fan of Merkel. I used to think she was terrific, a big leader, a great leader. I think what she did to Germany is a disgrace,
Okay, so there you go. All right, gentlemen, the folks here who actually know something about foreign policy, because been overseas, and I know, Bob, you worked for the World Affairs Council, and Mehrdad, you were born in Iran. So your thoughts on Mr. Trump's gentle tirade against terrorism?
I think as I listen to it closely, and I also think about the rise of Trump in terms of his popularity at the moment, there's some words in there that have some degree of truth. And if you go back and look at how ISIS has generated a great deal of their revenue as an example, there's no question. And they've been able to secure oil, sell it on the market, and produce an awful lot of working capital. So if he said this 2 years ago and then somebody finally decided that we've got to go after the oil, can I disavow that? Probably not. Can I disavow the fact that people may be coming into this country that intend to do us harm? Can you ask our security apparatus, as an example, to demonstrate that we do have the mechanisms in place to be able to vet properly people coming into the country? So even a madman has moments of clarity. And there's things that he's saying in there that do resonate, obviously, with people. So, where is that, though, applicable? And I would ask my colleague, Dr. Kia, where may that actually go from the rhetoric to the actual practical, from a foreign policy type of directive?
Well, first and foremost, I think what makes Mr. Trump unique is not so much the content or the concerns, but it's the delivery. And it's a language that it's more approachable. It's not the official Washington discourse, and it's not a it's very raw. Yeah, it's not a pre-typed, preset sort of language. And he's a little bit of working class billionaire. It's a working class discourse, but coming from a highly successful businessman. Having said that, though, we have to look at foreign policy in context of U.S. economic interest in the world. I mean, it doesn't matter how you deliver this and how you cut it. In the end, why is United States somewhere and why is United States not somewhere? And usually when you look at it, it's concrete geopolitical and economic interest of United States and American companies doing business. Europe is very important, not because we love Europe, it's because so much of our economy is interdependent with the European economy. So is China, so is Korea, so is Japan, and so is the Middle East and North Africa, as well as South Asia, for example, India and Pakistan. So these are the regions where we are involved economically, financially, in terms of trade and commerce.
Not to mention Mexico.
Yes, and I think in the end, North America, of course, Mexico and Canada, but it doesn't matter really how you deliver, your message. In the end, it is these priorities, I guess, that set the U.S. foreign policy agenda. And I think for both sides of the divide, they have to pay attention to the areas where American economic interest is concentrated. In North America, Mexico and Canada, definitely, but also various countries of South America, especially Brazil, Argentina, and in the case of Europe, of course, the entire European Union, and in the case of Middle East and North Africa, especially oil-producing countries. But this is a large market, an expanding market of nearly 400 million consumers. And then you go to India, and you go to China, and Korea, and Japan. These are, and of course, Southeast Asia with Indonesia and Malaysia, and the Philippines. So those are the areas that we have to look at in terms of the priorities of U.S. foreign policy.
All right, when we get back, I want to ask you about more of Trump's foreign policy stances, whether everything from the wall, taxing China, backing out of Europe militarily, backing out of Japan militarily. and much, much more exciting and dangerous plans from Mr. Donald Trump. We'll be back after this quick break.
Absolutely. And by the way, all three lines are open. If you have a comment or a question, want to throw your 2 cents or 5 cents or a nickel with inflation, 721-1290 is our number. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. All three lines open. We're talking a little bit of international relations here, and our so far presidential candidates. Dr. Mehrdad Kia joining us, Bob Seidenschwartz, John King. I'm Peter Christian, and we'd love to have you be a part of the conversation. Go ahead, Bob.
Are we running for office? You said the presidential candidates, Dr. Keaton, Mr. Seidenschwartz.
Well, we have the presidential candidates.
Let me give you my platform.
On tape, yes.
I want to just pivot off of what Dr. Kia said, because what he just kind of gave the audience is a very broad but accurate portrayal of what the next president is going to be smack up against in terms of what they will have to deal with. So if we're looking at the three candidates between Rubio, Cruz, and Trump, the three leaders at the moment, who do you feel would actually have a more realistic worldview of what you just described, or even somebody like Trump? Is this a lot of rhetoric for him right now, given that he has benefited tremendously from globalization?
Well, Trump's foreign policy statements sound very much like a very populist approach, withdrawing from certain areas of the world where United States has had military presence, for example, bringing the cost down. That is, United States thinking more about its own internal issues, economic issues, joblessness, unemployment, and standing up to China, standing up to Mexico, standing up to Japan. And strikingly, for me at least, they sound very much like Bernie Sanders. It's this populist discourse both on the left and on the right, which pretty much talk about America first and American concerns first, primary. Now, with the more established foreign policy statements, I would say that Senator Rubio has the more of established kind of traditional Republican point of view. But when you look at, for example, Governor Kasich, it's pretty much within the line of the established Republican foreign policy. I would say even with Senator Cruz, the same.
Would you say that it even is in line with what traditionally Democrat or Republican
Yes.
foreign policy would be?
Yes.
So making that distinction is different shades of gray.
Yes, exactly.
Historically.
So, for example, in the case of Middle East, you stand with conservative Arab governments, but even more importantly, you never give up or play with the support for the state of Israel, and you stand up to Iran, and you do not go and sign a deal with the Iranians, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much the established. And by the way, when you look at these statements and you compare it with Secretary Clinton, they're pretty much very similar.
Well, let's go ahead and play. I think that's kind of an interesting comparison. Obviously, Secretary Clinton was the State Department official under President Obama. Here is a statement from Marco Rubio where he criticizes what he sees as failures of the Obama administration on foreign policy, which I think you have to link directly with Hillary Clinton as well. Maybe this will distinguish him a little bit.
There's about a 4-minute break, or a 4-minute cut, so here we go.
President Kennedy, like most presidents before and since, understood what I believe our current president does not. That American strength is a means of preventing war, not promoting it. And that weakness, on the other hand, is the friend of danger and the enemy of peace. Since the end of the Cold War, the threats facing America have changed, but the need for American strength has not. It's only grown more pressing as the world has grown more interconnected. In recent decades, technology has demolished the barriers to travel and to trade. It's transforming our national economy into a global one. The prosperity of our people now depends on their ability to interact freely and safely in the international marketplace. Turmoil across the world can impact American families almost as much as turmoil across town. It can cause the cost of living to rise or entire industries to shed jobs and crumble. And so today, as never before, foreign policy is domestic policy. Sadly, I believe President Obama often disagrees with that simple truth. He entered office believing America was too hard on our adversaries, too engaged in too many places, that if we only took a step back and did more nation building at home, ceding leadership to other countries, America would be better liked and the world would be better off. And so he wasted no time stripping parts from the engine of American strength. He enacted hundreds of billions of dollars in defense cuts that left our Army on track to be at pre-World War II levels, our Navy at pre-World War I levels, and our Air Force with the smallest and oldest combat force in its history. He demonstrated a disregard for our moral purpose that at times flirted with disdain. He criticized America for having arrogance and the audacity to dictate our terms to other nations. From his reset with Russia, to his open hand to Iran, to his unreciprocated opening to Cuba, he has embraced regimes that systematically oppose every principle our nation has long championed. The deterioration of our physical and ideological strength has led to a world far more dangerous than when President Obama entered office. In just the last 2 years, we've seen an emboldened Russia invade Ukraine and annex Crimea. We've seen ISIS sweep across multiple states, commit brutal atrocities, and attempt to establish a caliphate. We've seen one of the most devastating humanitarian catastrophes in decades, as hundreds of thousands of Syrians have been slaughtered at the whim of a tyrant. We've seen the largest migration of refugees since World War II, bringing instability to an entire region and putting whole generations at risk of radicalization. We've seen China rapidly expand its military capabilities and take aggressive action in the South and East China Seas. And we've seen North Korea expand its nuclear arsenal and continue its brutal human rights violations. We've seen cyber attacks against our allies and against our people. We've seen peaceful protesters met with violence from their government. And most threatening of all, we have seen Iran expand its influence throughout the Middle East and threaten to annihilate Israel as it moves closer to a nuclear weapons capability. The president's proposed deal with Iran will likely lead to a cascade of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, and it could force Israel to take bold action to defend itself, making war with Iran even more likely.
Okay, there you go. So we're up against a break. We're going to come back and talk about Mr. Rubio, and I'd love to have your calls and comments. That's what it's a talk show. So give us a call, 721-1290. All three lines are open. Welcome, everybody. Hour number 2 of the Thursday edition of Talkback is brought to you by Bulls Eyewear, where they offer some of the lowest prices in town on contact lenses. See my friend Lynette at 2910 South Reserve. Nissan and Hyundai of Missoula under new management, offering rebates, discounts, and 0% financing on a huge selection of inventory on Brooks near South Cape Mall. And by Selway Armory on Stockyard Road. More guns and ammo than anyone in Missoula. The best prices in Montana. They are Montana's premier firearms dealer. Okay, we're talking foreign policy today and looking at some of our presidential candidates, the ones that we're able to get audio on about their foreign policy issues. Mehrdad Kia joining us here in studio, professor of University of Montana of History. We have Bob Seidenschwartz of the Montana World Affairs Council. John King, our venerable show producer, is over there. And we have Catherine on the line. Good morning, Catherine. Thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Well, good morning. Good morning, guys. I wanted to ask you about Russia, because Russia's been doing some very interesting things in this part of the globe. Last few years, they've really upped their game in South America, and they're looking to put in bases in Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela to park their military in, and especially in the Caribbean, which of course is right off of the coast of the United States.
Hold on a second now. This is,
yeah?
Wait a minute. I seem to remember this happening before a few years ago.
Yeah,
right?
about what, 50?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what you guys, especially you, Mehrdad, what if any moves you think we have made or should make or can we make to counteract this?
Good morning, Catherine. Thank you very much. As always, excellent question. So going back to, I think it was Senator Rubio's statement on standing up to Russia, I think the reality of standing up to Russia depends on U.S. policy vis-a-vis Europe. We cannot really make any move against Russia without cooperation and support from our European allies. So, for example, in the case of Ukraine, it is established norm that since Europe is very much dependent on petroleum and gas from Russian government, we have to be very careful not to alienate our allies, such as Germany, such as France, when it comes to standing up to Putin. However, with regard to the rest of it, I think the view in Washington, and I think it's both Republican and Democrat, is that Putin is using foreign policy in order to somehow create more popularity for himself in an economy which is sinking. And therefore, all this flexing of muscles in Syria, bringing naval battleships to South America, it's kind of creating a posture of the Russian Empire being back.
So it's like a kitschy version of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. While at home, his popularity is going down, though not as much as we would have liked to. Unemployment is going up, inflation is going up. So by all economic numbers that I have looked at, Russia is in big trouble. And the greater the trouble inside Russia, the more bellicose Putin becomes in terms of his foreign policy.
More directly back to Catherine's question, though. She had mentioned South America, Cuba, this hemisphere. Europe will probably play a smaller role in dealing with Russia in this hemisphere than, of course, in Ukraine, right? So should we, with that, in light of that view, which I also agree with, that Russia's expansionism is basically just to signal to the people that live in Russia that the empire is great again, do you think we should take any concern over this expansionism, or is it just for show? Does it pose any real threat?
Yeah, with Putin, you have to always remain concerned and always on guard. You can never let your guard down. And he can be a very dangerous decision maker when it comes to issues of foreign policy. Look, he invaded Crimea and he occupied the sovereign territory of another state, namely Ukraine. And he claimed it to be Russian, which it is not, actually. But this is usually within his backyard, meaning his invasion of Georgia, for example. This is the old Soviet Empire where he believes he can intervene militarily and getting away with it. Once he crosses that line into Europe proper, let's say Poland, for example, that would be a very different game. He knows that NATO will not have any other choice but to respond militarily. And I think he will be smarter than that to intervene militarily and bring the wrath of United States and NATO against him.
Why wasn't that line Ukraine? They were a member of NATO.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO.
There's agreements in NATO about Ukraine, I should say.
There were discussions about Ukraine joining the European Union. I think that has been always Putin's line, that European Union and NATO cannot cross a certain line that is getting too close to the Russian border. Belarus and Ukraine constitute buffers against European expansionism eastward. And he was irritated by the fact that Ukraine, as well as Georgia, by the way, were actually negotiating for European Union status and NATO training.
And Dr. Kia,
and that broke the back of the camel. Yeah.
My understanding is, going back a number of years, there were agreements made between NATO, Europe, the U.S., and Russia that we didn't own up to in terms of expansion. And if you look at this historically, those buffers are an absolute necessity for Russian survival.
Exactly.
Because of the East and West in terms of military conflict. So, and at least we forget with Europe, Germany and Poland are major trading partners.
Yeah.
Now here in this hemisphere, though, I think the opening of Cuba is telling Russia that I can pretty much do whatever I want because America is opening up. I think that has torn down some of the the hesitancy of the Russians to get back involved with Cuba because the way they were embarrassed during the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think now that America has made the move to open things up, basically America is saying, we surrender. We've been mad at you for 50-some years. I guess it hasn't worked out, so we're going to try something else. And now maybe Russia's saying, well, we'll just...
But what does Russia offer? Economically?
The question is, what do I buy from the Russians?
Right.
And what does Russia have to offer that is so attractive to Cuba? Before it was security, it was military hardware.
Oil.
But Cuba now is opening up its markets. Europeans are coming, American companies are coming. The Cubans prefer that kind of investment rather than the Russian.
So Catherine's still on the line. Let's give her a chance to talk before her ear falls
I
off.
was also thinking about, there's a lot of little islands in that area that are, for instance, under the flag of France and under the flag of England, of Britain, and in addition to, of course, under the flag of the United States. And how is this going to impact them, too, if Russia increases its presence in the Caribbean?
Okay, we're going to take a break, and we'll talk about that when we come back.
Okay.
Thanks, Catherine. All right, and we also have Bruce on the line, and we have two lines. Whoop, we had Bruce on the line. All right, all three lines are open, 721-1290. We're coming right back.
It goes back to...
All right, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. Little Montana World Affairs Council on the radio going on. Bob Seidenschwartz representing the council. Of course, Professor Mehrdad Kia, history professor at the University of Montana. We've been discussing the policies of the candidates that have made their speeches. They're saying, here's what I will do if I was president of the United States. We've already heard from Donald Trump. We heard from Marco Rubio. We're going to be hearing from the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton here in just a few minutes. But let's just wrap up where we're talking about being in this hemisphere. You had mentioned that the future of Cuba is not headed toward more of a socialist type communist system, right?
Well, my suggestion was that if Mr. Putin wants to invest in Raúl Castro as a long-term sort of economic and geopolitical interest, it's a losing sort of proposal. Why? Because the Castro regime is a dying regime. The future of Cuba is...
Quite literally.
Integration, exactly, is integration into the world economy. Cuba is opening up, not because they like to open up, at least not the regime, but because they're forced to open up, to create jobs, to create investment. European companies are there. I'm certain American companies will be there. And if Putin wants to waste all his resources, military, economic, oil, gas, let him do it. It is investing in zero return. Right. And I think, again, it's a posturing of a bully, of a thug. He wants to poke you in the eye just to get an enjoyment for the moment. But in fact, in the long term, there is no return for the Russian economy by investing in Cuba.
Catherine had a follow-up question about Venezuela and Russian influence. What are your thoughts on Venezuela and Russia?
I see the same thing. You have a dictatorship, at least an attempt to establish a dictatorship. And he saw once again an opportunity because there was anti-American rhetoric, there was an anti-American sort of a leader. And these are short-term sort of siding with the most vocal anti-American individual he can find. He's doing the same thing with Iran, by the way, in the Middle East. The more anti-American the regime in Iran is, the greater the help and assistance from Russia. But these are short-term situations which are dynamically changing as we watch.
So Dr. Kia, with Venezuela is on the verge of economic collapse. They're about to lose their credit rating completely, and this is a result of oil prices dropping off the face of the earth. So Russia doesn't have the financial backing anymore to be able to continue to make these forays. So of the presidential candidates, if we look at somebody, we haven't even heard any of them talk about in our own backyard, Latin America and the Caribbean area in terms of cooperation, economic development, from a perspective that I've looked at for years. This is a critical area, both from a population, a consumer market, and vast resources. I don't know of any of the candidates that have even vetted that issue.
Oh, Trump is all over that. It's 10 feet taller than you even imagine.
We know he's talking about Mexico. I'm talking about the greater South American area.
Well, one would think Rubio would be right in there. He's from Cuba. I mean, his family came directly from Cuba.
But we're always talking about Mexico. We're always
Right.
talking about Cuba. You rarely, if ever, hear them talk about Latin America,
Right.
Central America, south of Mexico.
But I think in the case of Cuba, with Senator Rubio, it's really a generational issue. The older Cuban community, members of the Cuban community, especially in Florida, they would agree with Senator Rubio. But the younger Cuban generation, they want open Cuba so they can go back, so they can invest, so they can interact. So I think eventually the future of Cuba-United States relationship is a much closer relationship rather than going back to the times of Fidel Castro.
Rubio and the older generation want to see the backs of the dictatorial leadership of Cuba broken. They want to see, and they don't want to coddle to it, and they don't want to see it perpetuated over another generation, which is something I can respect.
I think you might argue that President Obama and the Democrats want to see the same thing, but gradually by breaking down the economic walls and opening Cuba and exposing the Cuban markets to U.S. investment. So I think strategically the idea is the same. It's how to do it in terms of tactical
Do you pay someone to be nice or threaten them?
Right. Yeah, but you also have two Trumps. You have the bellicose, angry Trump who wants to bomb the beep out of whatever, and then you have the traitor Trump. You have I mean, not Trader is what I meant. You have the businessman Trump who looks at an opportunity like Cuba, like South America, as to open up. Okay, how do we make America more successful by sending our goods and our services across the country on an equal basis? So he can't be too bellicose on the one hand because he wants to have a trading partner on the other hand. I don't even sure if that's possible.
And regardless of which Trump we want to believe or accept as the real Trump, I think the reality, as we started the show, Bob and I, we both emphasized on the reality that foreign policy is about trade, is about commerce, is about investment, and it's about negotiations. You cannot have a foreign policy constantly with the threat of invasions and attacks against anyone you disagree with. So you hope that the trading Trump, as Peter put it, will triumph over the bellicose.
My guess is the trading Trump would triumph because that has been the origin of who he is. Now, you may be surprised. There was a group of Big Sky High School students that recently took a trip to Cuba. And I run into people, it seems like every week, that have just come back from Cuba. That is the vanguard of the change that we're talking about.
I think it's unfair because Bernie Sanders is still in the race. We should be at least pronouncing it Cuber once out of every 5 times. Cuber.
That's a New York thing.
Well, that's how Kennedy pronounced it.
We do have to go to a break. When we get back, I think we need to take on the one of the biggest foreign policy challenges, and that is understanding what Hillary Clinton's real position would be if she was in power. I'd like to get your take on that because I find it kind of baffling. I see her all over the place.
Okay, we're going to come right back. Stay with us.
You are right.
All right, 721-1290 is our number. Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. John King's over there. Bob Seidenschwartz, Dr. Mehrdad Kia from the University of Montana. Kind of kicking around policies, I guess, alleged policies of presidential candidates. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, this is actually a debate we got into with the last guest we had on for the World Affairs Council. He speaks on behalf of the Palestinians oftentimes.
Ibish.
Hussein Ibish. Hussein and I got in a back and forth over Hillary Clinton because I made the argument that it seems to me that Hillary Clinton is very, very much just kind of like a copycat of Bush foreign policy, plus extra stuff that she'll get involved with, whether that be Libya or, for example, some of the engagements we had under her husband's administration. They're more kind of liberal interventionism for humanitarian causes rather than just self-defense causes. And so I guess I'd like to get from you, Mehrdad, what you think of Hillary Clinton's foreign policy and what would it look like?
I think by instinct, Senator Clinton is hawkish in terms of foreign policy. However, her challenge is that since 2008, when President Obama created a coalition which is to the left and was based on ending wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, clearly, and she needs that constituency to win the election, she has moved more to the left as a result. But you're completely correct. Both her husband and herself have been far more to the center with a more hawkish intervention based on humanitarian issues. And that's, I think, the big difference between her and President Obama. She was not very big on negotiating with Iran. She had serious reservations about that. She has made statements which are almost more threatening, right, to break the deal with Iran. I mean, I'm just giving you the example of Iran, but you can use that example and just expand it. And for that reason, her strategy may be to rely on the Obama coalition to win the election, but once she's in the White House, if she is, then move the foreign policy agenda more to the center and more to the traditional Democratic Party hawkish
The
stance.
mercantilist
Yes, exactly.
perspective, again, of trading with these countries and negotiating for many of the right reasons.
I do have a statement from Hillary Clinton we can play. Peter's kind of queuing it up. But before we play that real quick, I want to ask you a little bit about this TPP deal, because foreign policy-wise, this is a big issue, right? In the past, Hillary Clinton has supported it right up until she decided to run and then told everyone she didn't support it because Bernie did. In the past, Donald Trump has been out against TPP, and so has Bernie Sanders. And what are being called the, quote, non-establishment candidates are against this trade deal, or what we are calling, I think it's a better term, the populist candidates are against this trade deal. Others have supported it. I believe Rubio and Clinton have both supported the TPP and open trade. What do you think about this particular issue, and why is there such a spectrum across the two parties on it?
This is, first of all, very few people even understand what the TPP is. Very similar to NAFTA in many respects in terms of opening up trade.
It is not toilet paper, just in case you're wondering.
Right. And right now, nobody's explaining. If you listen to Hillary or you listen to anybody else, they're not actually explaining to the public what the deal is. They're just saying, I don't favor this. This is going to be bad for you. So who do you think naturally kind of rises to that? The unions, people that are going to be, at least the perception is, most affected. And I think it's a straw man in many respects. I basically like the idea of having a framework when you think about China, having a relationship with a number of nations in that region so that you have the ability to have negotiations, to have a starting point, which is really what it is. And we had somebody on the show that talked about the TPP quite some time ago. It's very fluid. If it's put in place today, it's not going to be a permanent situation. It will evolve. But there's one thing I would say, and there was a story this morning. Michigan is begging for jobs of people in the trades. They have people looking for building trade specialties, and too many people have gone to college. My premise has always been, you worry about all these things externally. There's so much you can do internally to build your country, build the skill sets that are needed. These things will continue. It's like talking about the dollar. Should we hedge it? Should we not? It's just what it is sometimes. So while we are always looking externally, we're not focusing in many respects on some of the weaknesses that you need to rebuild internally so you can compete.
Then we're going to take a little break, come right back, and when we come back, we'll be hearing from former Senator and former Secretary of State and current presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. She has a statement about foreign policy. We'll have that when we come back. And by the way, all three lines are open at 721-1290. All right, we're back on 721-1290. This is Talk Back here on KGVO. John King, Bob Seiden Schwartz, Dr. Mehrdad Kia from the University of Montana. We're talking about foreign policy. John, go ahead.
Sure, yeah. This is a clip of Hillary's presentation to the Council on Foreign Relations, talking about how we can counteract the Islamist threat.
Here we go.
After a major terrorist attack, every society faces a choice between fear and resolve. The world's great democracies can't sacrifice our values or turn our backs on those in need. Therefore, we must choose resolve. Russia and Iran have to face the fact that continuing to prop up a vicious dictator will not bring stability. Right now, I'm afraid President Putin is actually making things somewhat worse. Now, to be clear, though, there is an important role for Russia to help. in resolving the conflict in Syria. Ultimately, our efforts will only succeed if the Arabs and Turks step up in a much bigger way. This is their fight, and they need to act like it. Thousands of young recruits have flocked to Syria from France, Germany, Belgium, the United Kingdom, and yes, even the United States. Their Western passports make it easier for them to cross borders and eventually return home radicalized and battle-hardened. Once and for all, the Saudis, the Qataris, and others need to stop their citizens from directly funding extremist organizations. We have to do a better job contesting online space, including websites and chat rooms where jihadists communicate with followers. We must deny them virtual territory just as we deny them actual territory. Social media companies can also do their part by swiftly shutting down terrorist accounts so they're not used to plan, provoke, or celebrate violence. At the end of the day, we still must be prepared to go after terrorists wherever they plot using all the tools at our disposal. That includes targeted strikes by U.S. military aircraft and drones with proper safeguards when there aren't any other viable options to deal with continuing imminent threats. Law enforcement also needs the trust of residents and communities, including in our own country, Muslim Americans. Now, this should go without saying, but in the current climate, it bears repeating. Muslim Americans are working every day on the front lines of the fight against radicalization. We need Silicon Valley not to view government as its adversary. We need to challenge our best minds in the private sector to work with our best minds in the public sector to develop solutions that will both keep us safe and protect our privacy. Let us resolve that we will go forward together, and we will do all we can to lead the world against this threat.
Okay, and when she starts speaking, I will let. Oh, she's done. I'm sorry, I just kind of lost track for a second. So, okay, gentlemen, your reactions to former Secretary of State.
Yada, 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 yada. A lot of things said, but no specifics.
It always scares me that when the former Secretary of State speaks, we need to make sure that we pronounce the name of countries correctly.
The gutterers.
There's
no
a new
country
gutter
in
nation.
the world called gutter, and there are no gutteries. There is Qatar, and there are Qataris. And it might be just the pronunciation, sorry. It's not to be, in fact, funny, but to call people belonging to gutter, that's quite poor pronunciation. Anyway,
It's also,
but it's not
also a double
confined to
meaning,
her.
too, yeah.
It's actually across the board,
Yeah.
and regardless of political affiliations. But what I heard really, in a very polite and sophisticated fashion, is we should bomb the hell out of them, which is really a position of Senator Cruz, for example. This is really a continuation of George W. Bush policy, with a little bit of nuance and a little bit of sort of a few things here and there. But I have said it before, and I say it now. Senator Clinton's foreign policy is extremely hawkish and is in line with the Republican foreign policy as espoused by Senator Rubio and Senator Cruz.
It's a grandma's way of saying, let's bomb the hell out of them. So, anyway, go ahead, John. Sorry.
So, with all that said, we've kind of discussed everybody a little bit. Who scares you the most? Who do you think would be the most dangerous in the role of president when it comes to foreign policy?
If forced to choose, I would say Senator Cruz. And this is only a perception. He appears to me to be very ideologically rigid and driven by some other factors that may shape his worldview. Now, do I know that that would be the case once he's in office? I don't. But I can only go by what I've heard and what I've seen in terms of his career as a senator.
At the same time, you always want to hope that while these folks, both on the Democratic and the Republican side, are pandering to all these constituencies out there, that once they're in White House, they adopt the most pragmatic approach to each and every foreign policy issue. This has not been the case recently, but you want to think that they will put the best team together, a team of thoughtful, knowledgeable individuals who will look at each case as a concrete case and set aside the ideological, the political, sort of fiery language and adopt a more pragmatic approach based on U.S. economic and political interest in each region of the world.
Well, that was a gentle kumbaya response to my really pointed question there, Mehrdad. So let's go back to that. What do you think is the who do you think is the most?
Isn't that why you invite me here?
Who is the most? Who do you think would be the most dangerous in the role of chief executive of the United States?
I don't think about it in that sense. I think right now they're all sort of pandering and they're trying to sort of sound more in control and more knowledgeable and more patriotic and determined to be the strongest candidate and so on and so forth. Once you're in the White House, the reality comes in like a fast train. And you have to decide not based on what you delivered in some speech for your supporters, but based on the realities on the ground. And that's what I hope they adopt, that while we are hearing all these speeches and all these shouting matches, in reality, once you are in White House, you are responsible to take a much more of a pragmatic approach.
Okay, this is waffle cakes. We know there have been bad foreign policy executives in the White House. I think we have one there right now. When it comes to running things, if you run, I think Bob made a good case. If he thought that Ted Cruz was ideological and he was a danger because of that ideology, which is exactly my same problem with Mr. Obama. I think he is ideological in foreign policy, and that's why he's dangerous. Then there's a spectrum here, right? Some are more dangerous than others, whether that be because of ideology or because of adventurism or because of ignorance or because of refusing to listen to advice. I mean, there's a bunch of spectrums, and for all of those, I think Trump and Bernie would probably be the most dangerous.
Yeah, we're going to take a break. Come right back. 721-1290. This is a fascinating conversation. We would love you to be a part of it with your phone calls or your Facebook posts, if you'd like, on our Facebook page. And we're coming right back. Solving the problems of the world one at a time. We are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. John King, Bob Seidenschwartz, Dr. Mehrdad Kia joining us. Now, the statement I made just went into the break. It's just, it doesn't matter who is in the White House, all right? There seems to be, and please forgive this horrible analogy, there seems to be a large basket of diplomatic goo that whoever the president is he's going to land in, and he'll be kind of trying to wade through that to take his view of what's going on in the world with these people that have been the bureaucrats that have been in charge of the State Department and the Pentagon and the Defense Department for years, who are saying, this is the direction we're going, and this is the direction we're going to slide you in, no matter how you came into it. So is that accurate or not? Bob, what do you think?
I think there's a great deal of truth to that. We were talking off the air that historically, U.S. foreign policy has been very consistent. And then the question you should ask is, who are the developers and implementation of who's responsible for implementation of that policy? So you're not going to find something radically different. And to your point, Peter, I've always wondered about Trump as a guy that's really run his own show in many respects. Does he have the temperament and understanding that coming into this presidential situation, he can't just wave his arms and say he wants this done? Even he has a board of directors he has to answer to.
And I think that's why some Republicans are opposed to him, because for the first time there's somebody who might not go to that foreign policy establishment in Washington and might bring new names who are not recognized as experts or specialists.
They're not part of the club.
Or members of the club, the foreign policy club. My limited understanding is that there's also within that policy club different lobbies or constituencies. And at times, Pentagon, especially during the presidency of George W. Bush, took the upper hand, basically. State Department was more or less a secondary source of policy making. I think under this administration, State Department has been given much more power and muscle to carry out the implementation of U.S. foreign policy.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and that goes to the type of character and background that the president sets in terms of tone.
Right. Okay, let's get Marilyn on the line. Marilyn, thanks for holding. Go ahead. You're on.
Good morning. Okay, to my recollection, when Ted Cruz was speaking of making the sand glow, it was in the context of wiping ISIS out because they were spreading across the region over there, taking more land and causing us to have a refugee crisis. And this administration was just doing little pinpricks and not accomplishing anything and seemingly promoting the cause of ISIS, and some say even caused ISIS to become a faction. And so, that's what Ted Cruz was saying, was he was going to wipe out ISIS. He wasn't going to just, do these few little...
I think in that same statement he also mentioned carpet bombing ISIS. And that
he
rhetoric
wanted to wipe out ISIS.
I get that. Right, wiping out ISIS is great, but the problem is carpet bombing is a tactic that you wipe out ISIS and every civilian in the region.
Well, we used to do war like that. And the problem with our country these days is that, God
I think
years back told us to take out the enemy, and we didn't, and so they've infiltrated and taken us over, and it's going to happen some more. And back to Peter Christian's point, often he says something else that's on my mind. The State Department has done a lot of damage over the years. Their policies, the policies that come out of the State Department, do have a huge bad effect on what goes on in this country. And I wish somebody could get in there and totally clean house somehow. They've done great damage.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. Appreciate the call.
If it was as simple as bombing somebody into oblivion, we wouldn't have these foreign policy issues. We would just simply bomb whoever we determined to be the enemy, end of story. It just, unfortunately, from Maryland's perspective, it just doesn't quite work like that.
I think also one of the principal objectives of U.S. foreign policy, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, is winning hearts and minds. You bomb a certain target, but you know that in the long run, this region is also a market for U.S. products. This is also a region of countries which are allies of United States. In order to have a long-term interest and legitimacy in the region, you cannot alienate the population. So carpet bombing, which includes destroying civilian population, is actually shooting United States in the foot.
And infrastructure.
And infrastructure. So while we have to target ISIS and we have to destroy this fascistic organization, at the same time we have to understand that the people of the region who are the victims of ISIS should be helped and supported by the United States for the long-term interest of them and the United States.
We're up against a break, and I guess my question would be, and we have a caller, is how do you win the hearts and minds of people that want us all dead? So that's...
I don't think the majority of population in the Middle East want Americans dead. I think that's, again, a big generalization. The last time I checked, we just had an election in Iran and several very interesting studies of the Iranian population. 89% of Iranians want open, very warm and close relationship with the United States.
When we come back with the
that's
caller,
only one country in the region. We can talk about
but
the
it's
rest.
significant because it represents a very young population across the entire Middle East spectrum.
And a highly educated population.
Go ahead, John.
When we get back, I think we have given an unfair shake to Mr. Sanders. I'll read his foreign policy stance, too. He's got a 4-bullet point. Since he has the same percentage of the electorate on the Democratic primary as Trump does in the Republican primary, I think it's fair.
So we'll be right back after this 1-minute break. Stay with us. Okay, we are back. A very, very rich discussion of what's going on in the Middle East, and of course with foreign policy with our presidential candidates. Go ahead, John.
I'll read this real quick, and then we'll get Chuck on.
Okay.
This is Bernie Sanders from his own website. Number 1, move away from policy of unilateral military action and toward a policy of emphasizing diplomacy and ensuring the decision to go to war is a last resort. Number 2, ensure that any military action we do engage in has clear goals, is limited in scope, and whenever possible provides support to our allies in the region. Number 3, close Guantanamo Bay, rein in the National Security Agency, abolish the use of torture, and remember what truly makes America exceptional, our values. Number 4, expand our global influence by promoting fair trade, addressing global climate change, providing humanitarian relief and economic assistance, defending the rule of law, and promoting human rights. That's his 4-point plan.
All right, let's get Chuck on the line. Good morning, Chuck. Thanks for holding. You're on Talkback. Hi.
I feel so good I could throw up after hearing that.
Go ahead, Chuck. What's on your mind?
Well, it's very simple. We're talking about winning over their minds and hearts with our jobs, creating violence in Baltimore and St. Louis and the south side of Chicago as we rip jobs away from American people. For what? Just for what? I'll tell you, I want to hear a State of the Union speech where the president says, I gave away 1.2 million jobs this year as an accomplishment. That's what I'd like to hear. And the State Department say, don't worry now, you live in a safer world. You may not have food or you may not have a job, but it's safer when nothing really changes.
Can you explain what you mean by the giveaway jobs? What are you talking about? Are you talking about businesses leaving the United States and going overseas, or what?
Listen, you got to listen to the small comments and the small shows. Saudi Arabia, Assistant Secretary of State said, we're going to keep the gas prices high in the United States so Saudi Arabia gets more money and treats their women nicer. And then someone sends jobs over there. They have someone, we build plants for them. This is going on, and no one talks about it. How do we win their hearts and minds? Do we just say nice things to them, or do we give them jobs?
Okay, Chuck, thanks for the call. So, gentlemen, any comment on what Chuck said?
The comment about winning hearts and minds is that if United States intends to be a major player in any region of the world, we have to be very careful in terms of implications of our foreign policy and in the context of our own military actions, if there needs to be one. And the comment was made in response to blanket bombing. Blanket bombing which alienates the native population in the region, and I know there are radicals, there are anti-American terrorists and so on and so forth, but to put everybody, hundreds of millions of people in the same bag and say, we will just kill you and turn you into a parking lot. That's a recipe for disaster in terms of the long-term U.S. interest. And it's fascinating. It's coming from people who claim to be very patriotic. And in reality, when you look at the implications of that kind of approach, it's actually shooting United States in the foot and its long-term interest in the region. Do we have to destroy ISIS? Absolutely. Do we have to form a coalition to accomplish that? Absolutely. Where I differ with Senator Sanders is that he constantly talks about the coalition on the ground, created, organized, led by Muslim countries in the region. And he always mentions King Abdullah of Jordan and so on and so forth. That coalition ain't coming, right? Without the United States playing a leading role in putting a coalition together, the regional players cannot, for different reasons we don't have time to actually create a coalition of their own. That's why U.S. leadership in the region is absolutely essential.
Okay, let's get one more quick call before we go. We got about a minute. John, what's on your mind?
Okay, my comment was the thunder was kind of stolen by the last caller, but it has to do with the hearts and minds. Yes, how do we intend to win their hearts and minds when we're not leading by example? I'd like to go at it from a different angle from jobs, but rather that we're not respecting our own people. We've started the war on drugs, and we've gone against our Constitution. We've put a lot of people in prison, but we haven't done anything to really stop a real dark undermarket of drugs in this country. And yet more and more people's tax dollars are going to fight that war, and we haven't won in our own country. So, that's a big boogeyman in our own country that we haven't won.
And we're running out of time. So real quick, so anybody want to address that one before we go?
John makes some very good points, and that's one of the things that if you look at historically and you look at, when they've looked at the Middle East and said, how do you perceive America? do as I say, not as I do. You cannot be contradictory and expect people anywhere to give respect to you. And in relation to jobs here, the gentleman before mentioned about like St. Louis and Baltimore and South Side Chicago, I have long advocated for the fact that if you really want to help our own people, what can you do that would benefit those areas? What about tax-free zones? What about the opportunity for people to come in from a business standpoint, create tax-free zones, because those jobs are not coming to South Side Chicago. The skill sets are not there. They're not coming to Baltimore. So, yeah, we got a lot of work to do here in terms of cleaning things up. So, John, thank you for your comments.
But then every presidential candidate has to have a foreign policy. That's part of being president.
Yes.
They also have to have a domestic economic policy. They have to have all sorts of policies in place.
And nobody's articulating that right now because
healthcare, education, you name it.
You don't want to get yourself sequestered.
And domestic economic policy should not be there to the exclusion of foreign policy.
Right.
The reality is that the United States is the sole superpower and has certain responsibilities and interests in the world.
And we're out of time. So tomorrow, John, what's coming on tomorrow's show?
We'll have open phones and the fishing show begins, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, have a great day, everybody, and thank you to our guests. We appreciate it. Have a good day.